People who have worked at resorts, what's the most fucked up thing you've seen? Story 1. I worked at a hotel in Paso Robles that had private hot tubs outside every room, and we checked in a couple of squatters. They stayed holed up in the room for several weeks. When they figured out we were onto them and attempting to evict them, they smeared poop all over the walls. We had to call hazmat to clean it and remove all the carpet. Then, after that incident, it was the most popular and requested room because it was all remodeled. Story 2, mountain resort that catered to wealthy hunters. 2 rooms decided that walking to each other's rooms was too much of a hassle, so decided to smash a huge hole in the wall that separated them. Not even contrite about it. Stayed for 3 more days. And the resort was privately owned by a family. It wasn't some big chain. Story 3. I worked in Yellowstone National Park, which has a resort, so close enough. One summer for seasonal work. We had several deaths that year. Drownings, falling off mountains, hikers getting lost, etc. But the worst was the kid who nearly died hot potting. If you don't know, Yellowstone has over 10,000 geothermal features, with acidity ranging from neutral to battery acid. And hot potting is when you find a spring that you can chill in like a sauna. It's very common if you know which spring to go to. There was a group of kids who were hot potting and probably getting drunk. And one wandered off and ended up accidentally breaking through the thin crust and falling into a spring that was incredibly acidic. When this happens, the boiling water, coupled with the acidity, eats away at your skin immediately. His skin from the waist down sloughed off, and I mean everything. My colleague was the one who answered the ER call. He spent a very long time in critical care, and we were all really shocked and happy that he survived. Story 4. Worked at a resort as a busboy in one of the buffet restaurants a few years ago. This rich kid got drunk at the bar, got invited to go party in the nearby local village by a few locals, accepted and left with them, against the staff's recommendations. He came back with nothing, not even clothes the next morning. Story 5. A guy had split with his GF weeks before. Checked into our hotel the day before Valentine's and sent her a message that he was in room XX, and if she didn't show, he'd know it was over. She didn't show. He took action the next morning. He had brought a tool for undoing the safety catch on the window and used it before he jumped. The guy plunged 7 stories, head hit the solid steel railing while going through a glass roof veranda. He landed on a concrete footpath less than 2 meters from the glass walls of our restaurant, spraying blood and other bodily fluids up the side. By some miracle, he missed the pedestrians. The restaurant was packed with customers having a romantic Valentine's morning breakfast, some just on the other side of the glass. Many required trauma counseling afterwards. Edit. Typo. Story 6. While working on the receiving dock, we had an ambulance arrive. Resorts don't like negative publicity, especially regarding the health of patrons, so emergency vehicles are directed to come through the back of the house, as it is referred to at most casino resorts. 2 EMTs come in pushing a gurney, and they are gone maybe 20 minutes before they come back with a body covered by a white sheet. The funny gross part was that the body had an obvious erection poking up in the middle of the sheet. They chuckled when everybody stared at it and said that the victim died of a cocaine and Viagra overdose. Story 7. Worked at the canyons in Park City as a lifty for a winter. Worked the base lifts, including the gondola, and one day was working the top. At the lift across from the top of the gondola, Saddleback. I was randomly just watching midday as it calmed down and saw a woman and her kid hop on. Thought nothing of it, obviously. A few minutes later, the lift stops and doesn't start spinning for 15, 20 minutes. During this time, a ton of patrollers on sleds came ripping up under the lift. Came to find out that the woman had a seizure on the way up, didn't have the bar down and fell off and broke her neck. Died instantly while her kid watched. Patrollers got there as soon as they could, but nothing they could do. We'll never forget helping the crying kid on the gondola to download with the patrollers. I am not epileptic or anything, but always put my bar down because of this now. Never know, man. Still think about it frequently during the winter, and it's been 10+ years. Story 8. La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club, 2006. I was part of the beach crew. I came upon a kid who had fallen while skimboarding and was bleeding on his face. Trophy wife mom was nearby as I called a paramedic on our radio. As we waited for the medic, I saw the shadow of a man walking up to us. I looked up and saw that he was wearing cowboy boots and jeans, very strange for being at the waterline on the beach. Then I saw he had a pint glass full of whiskey, a half-buttoned shirt with a dragon on it, and crazy white hair blowing in the wind. That's when I recognized him as Bill, from Kill Bill. Yes, It was David Carradine and his wife and her kids. He kind of shrugged and walked on. I didn't see him again until later that night, when me and a couple colleagues had to physically carry him up the stairs to his room at the hotel next door because he was so drunk. Not terribly long after that, I learned he died, but I will never forget that encounter. Story 9. Worked at a ski resort for a year. Housemate tried to take advantage of a drunk girl. It's not blood or shit or tragic accidents, but until you actually see someone do this, and it's not just something you see on TV or read about or hear about secondhand, you can't fully understand just how fucked up and depraved it truly is. Edit. For anyone asking, wondering, yes, I stopped it from happening. It was at a small party at the apartment. He isolated her twice during the night outside. The second time, he'd convinced her to let him go to her place with her, then came back in and pretended he needed to sleep because of an early work meeting the next day. I knew what he was up to when I saw him go outside with her the first time. I'm very good at reading people's situations, but he'd also pressured my friend into drinking when alone with him before, even though she said she didn't want any alcohol. I stayed outside to wait for our mutual friend to leave. I wanted a witness to him not actually going to sleep. Mutual friend and I talked, and I stalled until he came out of the apartment and was obviously shocked we were out there, but I played it off. Just as the mutual friend invited me to hang out at his place, the drunk girl drove up the road from driving her friends back down the mountain. I got into her car, and my housemate was already calling her after texting her a minute before. He was also magically right by the apartment, even though he told mutual friend and I he was going on a midnight walk. I asked the drunk girl if he was trying to hook up, and she said that she probably gave him the wrong impression, at which point I told her she was drunk and could give no one any impression. She and I made the 10-second drive to mutual friend's place, and our housemate bolted up the mountain. He was scared shitless when he got there, but I played it off and kept a close eye on him until the mutual disdain between us drove him to kick me out. When I discovered he'd inquired about an underage girl who worked at the resort hotel, as well as a barely legal coworker of mine who was very petite and still had braces, I reported the things I'd seen and heard to his boss, told his girlfriend about his incessant infidelity, and let the landlord know about his numerous lease violations in an attempt to drive him away from the resort altogether. He got fired. The girlfriend stayed for a few months before they split. She hated me immediately afterwards, but seemed to be fine with me after the breakup, probably because she suffered the same narcissistic emotional abuse I did. And the landlord chose money over ethics. Our mutual friends either chose not to take a side or actively felt like what I did was wrong, though the two I thought I'd bonded with and swore up and down they thought he was horrible, and I was the one they truly respected kept hanging out with him and wanted Jack to do with me. One mutual friend, a woman, even told me that although he did try to rape her friend, it was her friend's fault for putting herself in that situation. My other friend has always admired my intelligence in that situation because most people wouldn't have picked up on it, and something bad would have happened. That idea scares the shit out of me for any woman getting preyed on by a creep. I left a few months later. It taught me a lot about people. I regret nothing. Story 10. Worked in hospitality for quite a few years, some of the most memorable. Guy jumped from the second story because he was locked out of his room, broke both ankles. He was highly intoxicated and there with a group for a convention. Wife called the hotel because she was worried husband was drinking and thought he would unalive himself. Found him at the bar, started talking to him, and he was plastered and worried I was going to tell his wife. I asked if he needed a hug. A 50-plus man cried into my shoulder with all of his co-workers around. He was okay. His wife called a couple days later and thanked me for being so kind. Husband and wife go to the resort for an anniversary weekend. Husband gets a text from the AP's wife. All hell broke loose in the fine dining restaurant. Comes down to the front desk and continue arguing, able to de-escalate the situation, and booked her a separate room. Husband decided to check out of the hotel once the wife is sleeping in the middle of the night. Suspended her phone, canceled all of her credit cards, took all of his things and drove 4+ hours home. February 15th, go into a room to clean it. One night stay. Walked into what I thought was chocolate syrup and strawberry syrup all over the bed. It was in fact not strawberry syrup, but a mix of chocolate syrup, not chocolate syrup. Something that kind of resembles strawberry syrup and lube. Found a whip and used toys in the bathroom and $100 with a sorry note on the desk. Company rented out a cottage at the resort and had security called a couple of times over noise complaints and being on the golf course after hours. Housekeeping goes in the following day to find 4 naked men and a woman passed out upside down on the couch. They all worked together and she was the point of contact for the conference. The rock on her hand had to be at least 4 carats, and none were her husband. There was also a dude that died in a bathroom from a heart attack. Thankfully, it was a restroom that not many people frequented on the property. There was also a B-list celebrity that stole a golf cart while highly intoxicated. Got him to bring it back. He then tried to pay and convince me to go to his room for the night. He was a recovering alcoholic and had a 7 a.m. flight. Was able to get him to pull it together and make his flight. Called and apologized for his behavior a couple days later. Story 11, not me, a friend of a friend. Everything that happens at sea is covered under a myriad of weirdo legislation. You can't really sue a cruise line if something happens out at sea. But that's not well known, and the press photos of cruises look really fun. My friend had a high school education from Croatia and worked on the maintenance crew of the major cruise line. He said the repairs he was told to do were scary. Some training was given to him by more senior kinda handy guys, but not a lot. One time, 3 pieces of gym equipment broke. Weightlifting machines, and the boss told him, "Take today and get this sorted." So he took a toolbox and just figured it out as best he could. One of the machines he couldn't fix, but he made it look sort of fixed, and hoped Noonie complained. LOL. He had a bathroom vanity come down, so 2 guys held it in place while he covered it in caulk to put it back up. That's what he was told to do? Wild. Story 12 worked at an upscale hotel. Some things I remember. There was a large banquet area with collapsible walls that created smaller meeting areas when the big space wasn't needed. A co-worker pissed in the area where the collapsible wall would fold into, and it stunk for weeks. A guy got drunk at his company's event. While the upper executives were speaking, there was a loud thunk heard from the back of the room where the guy fell out of his chair. The entire room of 600 people heard and saw. The hotel promptly got him a wheelchair and a free room to sleep it off. My car was broken into in broad daylight. The guys that did it worked at the same hotel. They were found out an hour later when they tried to return the crowbar they borrowed from the maintenance department. Weeks later, they called me while I was working and told me to drop the charges, else they'd gun me down. Several people heard it all since the call was on a shared walkie-talkie. One event included smaller gatherings catered by the hotel in the guest rooms. I received a call that one of the rooms needed more drinks. When I arrived, I witnessed my male coworker dancing like a stripper on top of one of the tables. The group promptly grabbed me and cheered for me to do the same. We had a church group one Sunday. Spent all night setting up hundreds of chairs in neat rows. The next day when I walked in to check if they needed anything, I saw nothing but bodies rolling all over the floor and people speaking in tongues. The chairs were all stacked and moved out of the way. One event was Hawaiian luau themed, so they had a roasted pig for dinner. That thing was hideous to look at, but someone had to carve it on demand for the guests. One guest requested and was served its beehole. That's enough for now. Story 13. I worked at a rooftop rotating restaurant near SeaTac Airport. On my 3rd day, I was bussing a table and looked out the window at a high-rise apartment building a half-mile away. There were flames visible on the balcony, and they were growing. They appeared to be involving the apartment above. I yelled to my boss, and the 2 of us raced down to the 1st floor after directing one of the servers to call 911. As we ran down the street toward the fire, it became apparent that what we were seeing was a hibachi that some guy was firing up. As we slowed to a slow walk, we heard the fire trucks in the distance. Story 14, Heron Island, Australia, about a decade ago. Whilst they were at work, management decided to raid about 85% of the staff for contraband furniture in their rooms. The general manager, assistant manager, HR person, and HOD for housekeeping personally went room to room, taking out all furniture that was above the provided single bed and chest of drawers. Chairs, gone. Cupboards, gone. Dressers, gone. Tables, gone. All broken up and thrown into skips. All of the possessions in said furniture were unceremoniously dumped in the middle of the room or on their verandas. Bear in mind, all of this furniture was private property. It had been passed down from staff members to staff members for decades, but the GM declared that anything that staff left on the island when leaving was now property of the resort, and that staff could not gift possessions to other staff. Then they fired a 19-year-old staff member who had been on the island a week, having moved from France to work there, for crying so loud that guests could hear it. 20% of the staff quit over the next month. A bunch of them all temporarily moved into one house in the nearby port town of Gladstone, trying to get retribution, but were sadly shut down on all fronts. The workplace ombudsman didn't care. The real estate tenancy authority saw it as too hard work to prosecute. Not even the media were interested, because Australian media are almost always on the side of big business against workers. Thankfully, None of those people are there anymore. But if you go to any island resort in Australia, remember to treat the staff super kindly. Resort staff in Australia are treated like absolute shit by their employers 24/7, and most of the time don't even get to enjoy any of the perks of working in those locations. Eat it. Worth mentioning that all of those managers involved with this either left or were fired within 2 years of this happening. I don't know what current management is like, but the island is a wonderful place to visit if you get the opportunity. Story 15. Hotel was asked to retrieve something from a suite by the suite's occupant. I saw wigs, dresses, DVDs, sex toys strewn across the place. I was working the bar, got asked about what I saw the night before. Spouted off tales of getting rose petals from the local florist to scatter about a room, preparing candles before another renter's return. It was a ploy of the rich MFs to see if I'd snitch. Got 200 in tips, back in 2014. I know why people turn to newspapers, get paid. Story 16. I think the worst thing was the sheer amount of cheating. Super high-end resort. The phone calls coming in from wives looking at credit card bills and demanding to know what, when, who. Our billing department having the utmost privacy, but always having to be honest that it was a hotel in XX, romantic city. Not the convention where they said they were. We also had a computer system full of notes because the men would bring multiple cheat partners and their wives. So notes about who was who not to say welcome back to, no references to prior trips, etc. So sad to be complicit in that. Story 17. Lifty at a ski resort. I was checking tickets while a coworker was loading folks into chairs around a corner just out of sight. Peeked my head around when I heard the lift stop and folks screaming. Just in time to see a dad lose grip on his son who never got in the seat properly and dropped roughly 35 feet to the ground. Kid luckily ended up being totally fine and even walked under his own power with patrol to the medical offices.